The loud warning sirens screamed across Haven's Rest colony as flames lit up the sky. Commander Jake Morrison ran as fast as he could through streets filled with broken glass and twisted metal. His boots crunched on debris with every step. Time was running out fast. The enemy Dominion ships floating above them would start bombing everything in just a few minutes. Jake's heart pounded as he saw the chaos around him. Buildings were falling apart, smoke filled the air, and scared people were running everywhere. The smell of burning metal and fear filled his nose. He had been a soldier for 15 years, but this evacuation was different. This felt personal. Everyone get to Transport Bay 7 right now. Jake yelled into his communication device. His voice was getting hoarse from shouting orders all day. He watched as different types of alien families hurried toward the big coalition rescue ships. The tall blue Ventari people carried their children on their shoulders, while the crystal-like Solari merchants grabbed their most important belongings and ran. Jake had saved hundreds of people today, but he knew many more would not make it. The Dominion was ruthless. They did not care about innocent lives. When they said they would destroy a planet, they meant it. That is when Jake heard something that made him stop running. It was quiet compared to all the noise around him, but unmistakable, the soft crying of a child. The sound was coming from under a medical building that had been hit by bombs and collapsed. Jake did not think twice. He dropped to his knees and started pulling away heavy metal pieces and concrete chunks. His hands got cut by sharp edges, but he kept digging. The crying got louder as he worked. Finally, he found her. A tiny Thylorian girl was hiding in a small space under the wreckage. She looked about 6 years old in human terms, though Jake knew alien ages were hard to judge. Her silver skin, which should have been shiny and bright, was now covered with gray dust and dirt. The Thylorian people looked somewhat like foxes that walked on 2 legs, with pointy ears and fluffy tails. They were known across the galaxy for being incredibly smart and remembering everything they saw or heard. They were also some of the kindest, most peaceful aliens anyone had ever met. This little girl was holding onto a broken toy spaceship, probably something her parents had given her. Her big golden eyes looked up at Jake with pure terror. She had probably watched her whole world fall apart around her. Jake could see she was shaking, not just from fear but also from the cold. "Hey there, little one," Jake said softly, trying to make his voice gentle despite all the noise and danger around them. "It's going to be okay. I'm here to help you." The girl did not say anything, but Jake could tell she understood him. Most aliens in this part of the galaxy learned basic human language in school. She looked at his uniform and seemed to realize he was one of the good guys. Jake carefully lifted the child out of the rubble. She was so light and small, like holding a scared kitten. Her little arms wrapped around his neck immediately, and he could feel her heart beating fast against his chest. "Sir," came a crackling voice through Jake's earpiece. It was Lieutenant Maria Valdez, one of his most trusted officers. She sounded stressed and urgent. "Admiral Brooks is saying we have to leave right now. Our ships are completely full, there's no more room for anyone else." Jake looked down at the Thylorian child in his arms, then toward the transport ships in the distance. He could see them starting to power up their engines, getting ready to escape into space before the bombing started. "I've got one more person to save," Jake said into his communication device. The response came quickly and was not what Jake wanted to hear. "Commander Morrison, this is Admiral Brooks speaking." The Admiral's voice was cold and strict, the way it got when he was giving orders he expected to be followed without question. "Protocol 7 is now in effect. We can only take essential personnel. That means no unaccompanied alien children. Leave the alien behind and get to your ship immediately." Jake felt his stomach drop. He looked down at the little girl, who seemed to understand what the voices in his earpiece were talking about. Her golden eyes got even wider with fear, and her small hand grabbed onto Jake's uniform tighter, like she was trying to hold onto the only safe thing in her world. "Sir, I can't just leave her here," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm and professional even though inside he felt sick. "That's a direct order, Morrison," Admiral Brooks snapped back. "Leave the alien child and get to your ship right now. We launch in 60 seconds. Right then, the ground under Jake's feet shook violently as the first Dominion plasma weapons hit the other side of the city. The enemy was starting their attack early. Pretty soon, this whole area would be nothing but burning ruins and empty space. Jake looked down at the scared little girl one more time, then looked toward his transport ship where his crew was waiting for him. He had spent his whole career following orders, doing what he was told, being a good soldier. But as he felt this tiny alien child trembling in his arms, trusting him completely to keep her safe, Jake Morrison made a choice that would change everything. He started running toward the ship, still carrying the Thylorian girl. The metal doors of the transport bay slammed open with a loud bang that echoed through the entire ship. Admiral Richard Brooks marched in like a storm cloud, his heavy boots making angry sounds on the floor. His gray hair was messy and his uniform was wrinkled from the stress of the evacuation. Behind him walked two security guards, their hands resting on their weapons. Jake's small shuttle had just finished connecting to the main evacuation ship. As the doors opened, he stepped out still carrying the little Thylorian girl. She was wrapped in his jacket now, her silver face peeking out from the warm fabric. Her big golden eyes darted around nervously at all the new faces staring at them. "What is the meaning of this?" Admiral Brooks shouted, his voice booming across the bay. Everyone in the area, mechanics, other pilots, passengers waiting to be processed, all stopped what they were doing to watch. The Admiral's face was turning red with anger, and Jake could see a vein bulging in his forehead. "Commander Morrison, explain yourself immediately." Jake stood up straight, still holding the child protectively. "Sir, I couldn't leave her behind." "You directly disobeyed orders, Commander." Brooks stepped closer, pointing his finger at Jake's chest. The Admiral was shorter than Jake, but his anger made him seem much bigger and more threatening. "Do you have any idea what you've done? We have limited food, limited water, limited space for sleeping. Every single decision we make out here matters. One extra mouth to feed means someone else might go hungry." Jake felt the little girl, who he had learned was named Lyra during their short flight, press herself closer to his shoulder. She was trying to make herself as small as possible, like she wanted to disappear. Even though she was just a child, she clearly understood that the angry human was talking about her. The transport bay was getting crowded as more people gathered to watch the argument. Jake could see his fellow human crew members had very different reactions. Some were nodding their heads, seeming to agree with what he had done. A few even had small smiles on their faces, like they were proud of him. But others were shaking their heads and frowning, clearly thinking Jake had made a terrible mistake. Lieutenant Tom Richards, who had served with Jake for 3 years, stepped forward from the crowd. He was young but brave, always willing to speak up for what he believed was right. "Sir, with all due respect, she's just a little kid. Look at her, she's terrified and alone." Admiral Brooks spun around to face the lieutenant, his eyes flashing with anger. "She's an alien kid, Lieutenant Richards. Not our responsibility. We're here to save our own people and our allies who can contribute to the war effort." He turned back to Jake, his voice getting even louder. "Morrison, you've put this entire operation at risk. Do you know what the Thylorian government told us before we started this evacuation? They specifically said we should focus on saving their adult population, the scientists, the leaders, the workers. They gave up their rights to claim unaccompanied children because they knew we couldn't save everyone." Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He looked down at little Lyra, who was listening to every word even though she couldn't fully understand the adult politics behind it all. Her people's own government had basically said she wasn't important enough to save. The thought made Jake feel sick. "Her name is Lyra," Jake said quietly, making sure everyone could hear him. "And she's not just some alien. She's a person." Admiral Brooks' expression got even colder. Jake had known the Admiral for 8 years, and he had never seen him look so angry and disappointed. "Commander Morrison, you're confined to your quarters immediately. No contact with other crew members, no access to ship communications. When we reach Sanctuary Station in 4 days, you'll face a full military tribunal for disobedience and endangering coalition operations." The Admiral paused and looked down at Lyra with eyes that showed no warmth or kindness at all. The little girl seemed to sense his hostility and buried her face against Jake's neck. "And Morrison," Brooks continued, his voice now deadly quiet, "the alien child goes straight to the processing center the moment we dock. They'll figure out what to do with her there." Jake knew what processing meant. Lyra would be put in a refugee camp with thousands of other displaced aliens. She would be alone, scared, and probably never see anyone she knew ever again. The camps were not cruel, but they were not meant for traumatized children either. 2 security guards stepped forward to escort Jake and Lyra away from the transport bay. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Jake could feel dozens of eyes watching them. Some people whispered to each other, probably arguing about whether he had done the right thing or not. Jake's mind was racing as they reached his quarters. He had been a coalition officer for 15 years. He had worked hard to earn respect and trust. In one moment of conscience, he might have thrown it all away. Humans were still relatively new members of the Galactic Coalition, and they had to work twice as hard to prove they belonged. His actions could make other alien species think humans were unreliable and emotional. But as he sat on his narrow bunk with Lyra curled up next to him, still clutching her broken toy spaceship, Jake felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. Despite all the trouble he was in, despite his uncertain future, he knew in his heart he had done the right thing. Lyra looked up at him with her big golden eyes and whispered her first word since he found her, "Thank you." Jake smiled and gently patted her head. Whatever happened next, he would face it knowing he had chosen compassion over career, heart over orders. And somehow, that felt like the most human thing he could possibly do. 3 days had passed since Jake brought Lyra aboard the Coalition evacuation ship. He had been locked in his quarters most of the time, only allowed out for meals and 1 hour of supervised exercise. But today felt different. The guards seemed more nervous, whispering to each other when they thought he wasn't listening. Jake sat in the ship's tiny observation deck, one of the few places he was still allowed to visit. Through the thick glass windows, he could see stars streaming past as they traveled through space toward Sanctuary Station. Lyra sat beside him on the metal bench, her small legs dangling over the edge. She was wearing clothes that someone had found for her, a simple gray jumpsuit that was too big, making her look even smaller than she already was. "Come on, Lyra," Jake said gently, holding out a food packet. "You need to eat something. You haven't had much in 2 days." The little Thylorian girl looked at the food but didn't reach for it. Her golden eyes were still filled with sadness and fear. Since they had been confined together, she had barely said more than a few words. Jake knew she was smart though, he could see it in the way she watched everything that happened around them. When crew members walked by, her ears would perk up and she would listen carefully to their conversations, even though she pretended not to understand. Jake was starting to worry about her health. Thylorian children needed special minerals that human food didn't have. If she didn't start eating soon, she could get very sick. Suddenly, the observation deck doors burst open with a loud crash. Lieutenant Maria Valdez rushed in, breathing hard like she had been running. Her usually neat uniform was wrinkled and her dark hair was messy. Jake could tell immediately that something was very wrong. "Sir," Valdez said, looking around nervously to make sure no one else was listening. "We've got a serious problem. I just came from the command center. The Coalition Council has issued an official arrest warrant for you. Admiral Brooks has orders to put you in the ship's prison immediately." Jake felt his stomach drop, but he tried to stay calm for Lyra's sake. "And what about her?" he asked, nodding toward the little girl who was now watching their conversation with wide, frightened eyes. Valdez's face went pale. "Admiral Brooks is having her transferred to a research facility as soon as we reach Sanctuary Station. They're saying something about extracting strategic information from her memories." Jake's blood turned cold. He grabbed Valdez's arm. "What do you mean, extracting information?" "Sir, during the evacuation, she was found near that Dominion forward base, remember? Intelligence thinks she might have seen something important, enemy weapons, troop movements, secret plans. They want to use telepathic machines to pull the memories out of her brain." Jake looked down at Lyra, who was now trembling. Even though she was young, Thylorians were naturally telepathic. She probably understood exactly what they were planning to do to her. The process would be terrifying for any child, but for a traumatized 6-year-old who had already lost everything, it could destroy her mind completely. "They want to interrogate a scared little kid?" Jake asked, his voice rising with anger. "She's been through enough." Before Valdez could answer, loud alarm sirens started blaring throughout the ship. Red warning lights flashed on the walls, and an automated voice began speaking over the intercom system. "All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Enemy ships detected. All hands to battle stations." The observation deck's windows suddenly lit up with bright flashes of light. Jake pressed his face to the glass and saw something that made his heart race. Sleek black Dominion fighter ships were coming toward them from one direction, their weapons already charging up to fire. In the confusion and panic that followed, Jake made a decision that surprised even him. He had always been a rule follower, someone who did what he was told and trusted his superiors. But looking at Lyra's terrified face, he knew he couldn't let them take her away to be experimented on. "Valdez," he said quickly, "where are Richards and the others?" "Maintenance Bay 3, preparing the backup shuttles in case we need to evacuate again." "Good. Can you get us there without being seen?" Valdez stared at him. "Sir, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking someone needs to protect this little girl, and apparently that someone is going to have to be me." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself running through the ship's corridors with Lyra in his arms and 4 loyal crew members following behind him. Lieutenant Tom Richards had immediately volunteered to help, along with Chief Engineer Betty Walsh, Communications Officer Danny Park, and Medical Technician Lisa Cruz. They were all risking their careers and possibly their lives, but none of them hesitated when Jake explained the situation. They reached the maintenance shuttle just as Admiral Brooks' voice came crackling over the ship's communication system. "Commander Morrison, I know what you're planning. Security teams are on their way to your location. Surrender now and return to your quarters immediately." Jake strapped Lyra into a safety seat and began powering up the small shuttle's engines. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he responded. "Can't do that, sir," he said into his headset. "Someone needs to protect this little girl, and it looks like that's going to be me." "You're making this worse for yourself, Morrison. You're already facing court-martial, don't add theft and desertion to the charges." The shuttle's engines roared to life. Through the small window, Jake could see Coalition security officers running toward their bay, but they were too late. The shuttle shot out into space just as the bay doors were sealing shut. But their escape was far from over. Jake's blood froze as he looked at his scanner displays. Not only were Coalition interceptor ships chasing them from behind, but Dominion fighters were approaching from the front. They were trapped between two enemy forces. "How did they find us so fast?" Richards asked, checking his own instruments. Jake watched the tactical display and felt a chill run down his spine. The Dominion ships weren't searching randomly, they were flying directly toward the Coalition fleet's exact position, as if they had known exactly where to look. "Someone told them where we were," Jake said quietly. "Someone on our own side gave away our location." As their small shuttle jumped into hyperspace with both Coalition and Dominion ships in pursuit, Jake realized they weren't just running from Admiral Brooks anymore. They were caught in the middle of something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple rescue mission. The hunt had begun, and Jake was no longer sure who the real enemy was. The small maintenance shuttle drifted silently through a field of floating rocks near the Kepler star system. Jake had chosen this hiding spot carefully. The asteroids would block their heat signature and make them nearly invisible to enemy scanners. For 3 days now, they had been playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with both Coalition and Dominion forces. Inside the cramped shuttle, Jake sat cross-legged on the metal floor with little Lyra. The past few days had been hard on everyone, but especially on her. The 6-year-old Thylorian girl had barely eaten anything, and she often woke up screaming from nightmares. Her silver skin had lost its natural shine, and her golden eyes looked hollow and tired. Jake held up his electronic tablet, showing her pictures of different things, buildings, vehicles, weapons, and people. He had downloaded thousands of images from the Coalition database, hoping something might help unlock the memories trapped in her traumatized mind. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jake said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "You don't have to be scared. Just point to anything you remember seeing on your home planet before the bad people came." Lyra's small hand shook as she slowly reached toward the tablet. Her finger touched a picture of Dominion soldiers in their black armor, and Jake saw her whole body tense up with fear. She quickly pulled her hand back and hugged her broken toy spaceship closer to her chest. "You're doing great, Lyra. You're so brave," Jake encouraged her. "Can you show me anything else?" This time, she pointed to something that made Jake's blood run cold, strange crystal-like devices that looked like nothing he had ever seen before. They were geometric and beautiful, but somehow menacing at the same time. Lieutenant Tom Richards sat at the shuttle's pilot controls, constantly checking their sensors for any sign of approaching ships. Every few minutes, he would scan different frequencies to make sure they were still hidden. The stress was getting to everyone. They had been living on emergency food packets and recycled water, sleeping in shifts on the hard floor. Dr. Amy Chen, the medical officer who had volunteered to join their desperate escape, was studying Lyra with professional concern. Chen was one of the few humans who had studied alien psychology and telepathic abilities. She had joined Jake's crew not just because she believed he was right, but because she knew the Coalition's plan to forcibly extract Lyra's memories could permanently damage the child's mind. "Commander," Dr. Chen said quietly, pulling Jake aside while Lyra looked through more pictures. "I think she saw something really important at that Dominion base. Her telepathic abilities are much stronger than normal for her age, but the trauma has created mental barriers. It's like her brain is protecting itself by locking away the scary memories." Jake nodded, watching Lyra carefully. Thylorians were naturally telepathic from birth, but usually children her age could only sense emotions and basic thoughts. The fact that military intelligence wanted to extract strategic information from her suggested she had witnessed something extraordinary. "Can you help her remember without hurting her?" Jake asked. "Maybe. With her permission, I can try to make a gentle telepathic connection. But it has to be her choice. Forced telepathic contact could make things worse. Dr. Chen knelt down next to Lyra and spoke in a soft, motherly voice. Lyra, honey, I know you're scared. But sometimes when we share scary memories with someone else, they don't feel as scary anymore. Would you let me help you remember what you saw? I promise I'll be very gentle. Lyra looked at Jake, as if asking for permission. When he nodded encouragingly, she slowly reached out and took Dr. Chen's hand. What happened next was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Suddenly, his mind was filled with images that weren't his own, fragmented memories from Lyra's perspective. He saw Dominion scientists in a secret underground laboratory, working with crystalline devices that pulsed with strange energy. The crystals were connected to massive computers, and on the screens Jake could see star maps showing coalition fleet positions. That's impossible, Lieutenant Richards whispered, somehow also receiving the telepathic images. Our hyperspace jump drives use quantum encryption. Nobody should be able to track ships through hyperspace. But the memories were crystal clear. Jake watched in horror as Dominion technicians tested their device, successfully locating and tracking coalition ships that thought they were safely hidden in hyperspace. The tracking system used rare quantum crystals that could only be found on a handful of planets throughout the galaxy. Oh no, Jake breathed, understanding flooding through him. That's why they attacked Lyra's home world. It wasn't about the colony at all, they needed those crystals. The implications hit him like a punch to the stomach. If the Dominion could track coalition ships through hyperspace, then no fleet was safe. Every military vessel, every rescue ship, every civilian transport could be hunted down and destroyed. It explained how Dominion forces had been winning so many battles lately. They always seemed to know exactly where coalition ships would appear. They're tracking our entire fleet, Jake said, his voice filled with growing horror. Every ship, every mission, everything. The coalition has no idea how exposed they are. Before Jake could fully process what this meant for the war, alarms started beeping on their control panel. Richards quickly checked his scanners and cursed under his breath. We've got company. Coalition ships, coming in fast. At least 6 vessels, all armed. Admiral Brooks' familiar voice suddenly filled their small shuttle, transmitted on an emergency frequency that couldn't be blocked. Commander Morrison, this is your final warning. You are completely surrounded. Surrender immediately and return the alien child. You've done enough damage to coalition operations. Jake looked around at his small crew, Richards at the controls, Dr. Chen still holding Lyra's hand, and the others preparing for whatever came next. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and outgunned. But they had stumbled onto information that could save millions of lives. Richards, open all communication channels, coalition, Dominion, civilian frequencies, emergency broadcasts, everything, Jake ordered. Sir, what are you planning? Jake looked down at little Lyra, who was watching him with those big golden eyes that seemed to understand everything. She gave him a small nod, as if she knew what he was about to do and approved. We're going to broadcast everything, Jake said firmly. Lyra's memories, the tracking device, the crystal locations, all of it. The entire galaxy needs to know what the Dominion is capable of. Commander, that will ruin your career permanently, Richards warned. The coalition will consider it treason. Jake smiled sadly. My career was over the moment I decided to save one scared little girl. But maybe this information can save a lot more people. As their transmission began broadcasting across known space, carrying Lyra's telepathic memories to every receiver in the galaxy, Jake prepared himself for whatever consequences would follow. He had chosen to protect one child, and in doing so, he might have just changed the course of an entire war. The massive tribunal chamber on Sanctuary Station buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled every available seat. Jake had never seen so many different alien species in one place, tall, graceful Altarians with their flowing robes, stocky Corvan miners still wearing their work clothes, elegant Zephyrian diplomats with their crystalline features, and dozens of others. The air was thick with the smell of different atmospheres and the sound of universal translators working overtime. Jake stood at attention in the center of the room, wearing his dress uniform that had been cleaned and pressed for this moment. His hands were clasped behind his back, but inside he was trembling. After weeks of investigation and preparation, his fate would finally be decided today. Behind the judge's bench sat a panel of 7 officials representing the major coalition species, each one looking stern and serious. Admiral Brooks rose from his seat, holding a data tablet containing the formal charges. His weathered face showed no emotion as he began to read in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber's audio system. Commander Jake Morrison, you stand accused of the following crimes against Coalition military law: deliberate insubordination of direct orders, theft of Coalition property, endangering classified operations, unauthorized use of military equipment, and reckless endangerment of civilian personnel. The Admiral's voice was cold and professional as he continued listing each charge. The maximum penalty for these combined offenses is 20 years in military prison and permanent expulsion from Coalition service. Jake felt his stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. He had known this day would come ever since he made that first choice to save Lyra. Around the chamber, he could hear whispers and murmurs as beings discussed his case in dozens of different languages. But something had changed in the weeks since Jake's desperate broadcast from the asteroid field. The intelligence that little Lyra had provided about the Dominion's tracking technology had proven to be completely accurate. Coalition engineers had worked around the clock to develop countermeasures, and the results were already showing on the battlefield. Admiral Brooks cleared his throat and continued, his tone shifting slightly. However, this tribunal cannot ignore the strategic value of the defendant's actions. In the 3 weeks since Commander Morrison's unauthorized broadcast, Coalition forces have successfully countered 3 major Dominion offensives. The intelligence provided by the refugee child has already saved an estimated 40,000 military personnel and 200,000 civilians. A ripple of surprised voices went through the crowd. Jake looked up hopefully, but tried not to get his hopes up too much. Council leader Thessarian, a massive reptilian being from the powerful Draconis system, stood up next. His scales gleamed under the chamber's bright lights, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. The human Morrison clearly violated direct military orders. Our entire command structure depends on discipline and obedience. If we allow officers to pick and choose which orders to follow, we invite chaos and disaster. Several alien officials nodded in agreement. Jake could see that many of the more traditional species believed strongly in military hierarchy and following rules without question. But then a new voice spoke up from the gallery. With all due respect to the Council, I believe we need to look at the bigger picture here. Jake turned to see Captain Susan Walsh standing up in the witness section. She had been his classmate at the Coalition Military Academy 15 years ago, and they had served together on 2 different ships before being assigned to separate commands. Susan was known for her brilliant tactical mind and her unwavering sense of justice. Commander Morrison's actions revealed a fundamental flaw in our entire approach to military operations, Susan continued, her voice clear and confident. We were so focused on following protocol and maintaining order that we nearly missed intelligence that saved thousands of lives. How many other refugees have we ignored? How much crucial information have we dismissed simply because it came from someone we considered unimportant? Jake felt a surge of gratitude toward his old friend. Susan was taking a big risk by speaking up for him. Her own career could be damaged by supporting a convicted insubordinate. As the debate continued, Jake looked back into the gallery and saw the person who mattered most to him. Lyra sat in the front row, wearing a small Coalition uniform that had been specially made for civilian auxiliary personnel. The little Thylorian girl looked healthy and happy for the first time since he had found her in those ruins. Her silver skin had regained its natural shine, and her golden eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity. Over the past few weeks, Lyra had officially been adopted by Jake while they waited for his trial. More importantly, her unique telepathic abilities had proven incredibly valuable in helping other traumatized refugees. She could sense their fears and memories in ways that no human counselor could, helping them process their experiences and recover from their ordeals. The tribunal judges deliberated for what felt like hours. Jake could hear heated discussions coming from their closed conference room, with voices rising and falling in argument. Finally, they returned to the chamber, and Admiral Brooks stood to deliver their verdict. Commander Morrison, Brooks began, and Jake could not read the expression on the Admiral's face. You violated direct orders and put this entire operation at risk. Your actions were reckless and dangerous, and they could have resulted in disaster for everyone involved. Jake's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a guilty verdict. However, the Admiral continued, your actions also demonstrated something that this coalition has apparently forgotten in our focus on military efficiency. Our true strength does not lie in blind obedience to orders or rigid adherence to protocol. Our strength lies in our commitment to protecting all sentient life, regardless of species, politics, or strategic value. Jake held his breath, afraid to hope. Therefore, all charges against Commander Morrison are hereby dismissed. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cheers and angry shouts. Furthermore, you are promoted to the rank of Admiral and assigned to develop new first contact and refugee protection protocols for the entire Coalition fleet. Jake felt like his legs might give out from relief. As beings throughout the chamber either congratulated him or glared at him with disapproval, he felt a small, familiar hand slip into his own. Lyra looked up at him with those big golden eyes and said, in clear, perfect human language, "Thank you for not leaving me behind, Dad." Those were the first complete words she had spoken since that terrible day on her home planet, and hearing her call him Dad made Jake's eyes fill with tears of joy. 6 months later, Admiral Jake Morrison's new policies had completely transformed how the Coalition handled refugee operations. The Morrison Protocols established firm rules that no sentient being could be abandoned based on their species, age, or political usefulness. Every refugee was to be treated with dignity and given the opportunity to contribute whatever knowledge or skills they possessed. Lyra became a special liaison officer, using her telepathic abilities to help other traumatized refugees process their experiences and recover from their ordeals. Her gentle presence and understanding had helped hundreds of beings find peace and hope again. The Dominion's tracking advantage had been completely neutralized, and their military advance had stalled across multiple fronts. But more than just tactical victory, humanity had earned something far more valuable: the genuine respect of the entire galaxy for choosing compassion over convenience, heart over hierarchy. Jake often found himself thinking about that crucial moment in the burning ruins of Haven's Rest, when he had to choose between following orders and following his conscience. Looking at Lyra now, watching her help other frightened children feel safe and loved, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes being truly human meant refusing to leave anyone behind, no matter what the cost.